Going into Auburn's game this weekend against Ole Miss, it feels different than any game I've felt over the last, decade?
Well, Zach, I actually just finished crushing some chicken farm, and I am freaking ready to rock and roll.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zac Blackerby. Thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. I want to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Happy War Report Wednesday to all who celebrate. Mike G of the War Report hanging out with us. We talked about this briefly before we clicked record, Mike G. But going into this game this Saturday, it feels different than any Auburn game, or I guess any Auburn game week that I've felt in the last decade, because the level of indifference around this football program at this point of the season, it's sad, borderline devastating, Mike G, in regards to, okay, every other kind of situation over the last several years for Auburn football where there's been a little bit of a dip, a little bit of a valley, you've been able to talk yourself into upside, right? Like, okay, maybe Auburn can pull this off because Auburn does weird Auburn things. And it just doesn't feel like that's around this program right now, and it's a shame.
Yeah, let me tell you this, Zach. I think why this feels different is because no matter what's happened in the lead up to this game, if you lose this one, you now have a losing record. For the first time in the season, you have a losing record. Auburn sits at 3-3 right now. It's going to be it was really tough. I think that there have been a number of losses that have felt bad in multiple ways. It's either been a beatdown or it was a game that they should have won, but they lost. Those are two categories that, Auburn's games fall into this year.
The beatdowns, obviously Penn State and Georgia, and the one that Auburn feels like they should have won, LSU at home. Sure, yeah, absolutely.
But you lost, right? If you at least get LSU, maybe there's a different feeling around this one. I don't know that anybody really expected us to beat Georgia. I certainly had them in my L column on our preseason picks. Sure. I just didn't think it was there. Georgia somehow came out and figured out how to be better on defense, like magically this year after an all-time great defense. But, there's a lot in flux. I mean, there's a lot that feels worse than it actually is at this point of the season. So going into Ole Miss, there's a lot of anxiety around this game because Auburn could be 3-4 coming out of this.
Right. And even if you win, there's a lot of folks that are like, still, so what, right? I mean, Mississippi State on the road is going to be tough. Obviously, Alabama on the road is going to be tough. And then, Arkansas and A&M at home is tough. And right now, I don't think Western Kentucky's a gimme. So I just hate the whole... There's really no positive way to spin any of this, because if there was, I promise I'd be doing it.
Right. Yeah. I've been accused of many a boog.
Booging?
Right? Yeah. I've been booging on this.
If there's a way to boog, I'm a booger. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I know you are.
I love to boog.
As am I.
It's hard to boog right now.
Yeah. But we still got to talk about what they do on the field. And the bottom line is this offense has not only not been good,
right?
They've been historically bad for an Auburn offense. Now, there was one thing, Zach, coming into the season that I had not anticipated. Like I got that our O-line wasn't going to be great, but they have progressively gotten worse as the season has gone on. Like it needs to be noted that this version of this O-line is significantly worse than last year's version. It's not good.
For sure.
Right. And they had 2 O-linemen go down Saturday versus Georgia, which exacerbated issues that they had. Alec Jackson was losing every battle. Troxell got hurt. It was just.
But both were still starters on this week's depth chart. So reading between the lines, it sounds like everybody's going to be okay for Ole Miss.
Yeah. It's been a tough uphill battle for an offense to have a line like this that, any optimism I had coming into the season was about the line holding serve from last year, right? And maybe possibly improving some. But they went the other direction. And for a first-year quarterback, that's tough. I mean, versus Georgia, think about how much Robby Ashford was under fire. No sacks. No sacks against Georgia, right? So he was just running away from pressure. I thought he did a decent job throwing the ball away when he had to, when there was nothing there, instead of trying to force it. But ultimately, what the discussion about this team is going to be about offense and lack of offense when you have an offensive head coach. Now, I've been willing to wait to see what they do before I go full negative on what we've seen, but I'm pretty close to there. Like, I mean, you're not competing with the better teams, and then you're playing almost like down to the competition. If that's fair to say. Like, even when you're better than the team,
it's been close. Down. Yeah, I mean, it was too close against, Mercer. It was too close against San Jose State. It was too close against Missouri, and it was close against LSU. So I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and
I want to stay on your offensive line point for just a second. So Jaleel Irvin played 18 snaps, which I think we all agree is too many. And of those 18, 14 of them were passes, and his pass block grade on Pro Football Focus was a 36.4. That's out of 100 for those keeping score at home.
Yikes.
Alec Jackson played 19 snaps. 14 of those were pass blocking situations, and his pass block grade was 22.9.
Yikes.
Brendan Coffey, your right tackle, played 27 snaps. 19 of those were pass blocking situations. 16.7. That's devastating.
Yeah, it is. It is devastating.
You can't win with that. With three guys playing, a good amount of snaps for whatever reason, and most of those have to do with injury. But it's just like, how do you compete with that? And a lot of Auburn fans, rightfully so, are upset with the offensive line coach, Will Friend. And it's like he was brought in to be a recruiter. He's not winning on the recruiting battles. And the offensive linemen, both as a unit and as individuals, they're not improving. And that falls on the position coach.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, when we look back at this staff, one of the things that's going to be noted as one of their great Achilles heel was the inability to be able to identify what kind of team you have and pivot to an offensive game plan that accounts for those weaknesses, right? Like, I mean, what we saw versus LSU was how they should have been running offense this whole season. It's the only version of this offense. People complain about Tank not getting the ball enough, but the numbers that you just stated on offensive line and grades, you can't run through Tank with this offensive line. You just can't. He's getting hit in the backfield. I still think that, Tank is maybe playing a little hesitant because of it. Jarquez Hunter seems to be doing a good job breaking tackles and making something out of nothing. Those guys have different running styles, but ultimately the line, especially when you have young quarterbacks, with not a lot of on-field experience, which is Robby Ashford. He's talking about a guy who was in his third start on Saturday, his third full start, where he prepared as a starter all week and went in. And there are growing pains when it comes to that. And it just sucks that he's using most of his energy and talent just trying to escape and stay alive rather than making plays and going through reads and doing things you want your quarterback to be doing.
Yep. Nope. You're right. All right. A lot of Auburn fans are asking, is this the weekend a change could be made, or is it more likely that we see something happen towards the end of the season or even after the Iron Bowl? We share our thoughts in just a moment right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. Look, if you're a small business owner, you deal with personnel changes all the time. Maybe Auburn will be doing the same thing soon. We will have to wait and see, but you realize how crucial a hire can be, and LinkedIn Jobs totally gets that, especially for small business owners out there. So you can post your job for free at LinkedIn Jobs, and all you have to do is do just that. And we realize at LinkedIn realizes how crucial your time is. And so you can add all these qualifiers, right? How many years of experience you can set, do they need to know a certain skill or have a certain certification? You can set all of that in your job posting So LinkedIn will weed out some folks for you. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Mike G of the War Report. Is this weekend the weekend where we see a potential historical impact at Auburn? Or is Bryan Harsin the head coach for the rest of the season?
My sources are telling me that we can expect Bryan Harsin to remain the coach until the end of the season. For the record, nobody on his staff has been told that he will not be retained after or is not going to be the coach at the end of the season. So while there may be talks happening behind the scenes, nobody on the staff has been told that as of today. Now, there were some errant reports a couple weeks ago that he had been informed already that he wasn't going to be retained. That none of that was true. And my understanding is our new president is leaning towards wait and see. And let's evaluate the whole and talk about the whole body of work when we make the decision, which I think is the right thing to do here, not only in terms of this season, but in terms of if you do decide to move on, the perception that you gave the coach a chance to play it all the way out. And you made the decision based on the whole body of work and not what you were projecting he was going to do.
Yeah, I'm there with you. And I think I've been pretty consistent on this. Waiting until the end of the season is best for the program. It's best for the 2022 Auburn Tigers. And I think also it'll be best for the fan base moving forward for a couple of different reasons. I was talking about this with my neighbor. Shout out Marcus, listener of the show. Appreciate you, Marcus. But I think everybody's biggest argument, right, is like, well, he's not out there recruiting. The staff's not out there recruiting, which if you talk to them, that's not necessary. I don't know how entirely true that is. We'll see. I just see pictures of like Zac out there every week recruiting. So I don't know. Maybe it's just select members of the staff. We'll have to wait and see. But I don't think that changes if you fire him. So I'm not buying that that's a reason. And also, if you're part of the Auburn fan base that just wants him gone because you just can't stand the guy, which there's a lot of you watching that just can't stand the dude, that's cool. Whatever. I'm not telling you what to feel. But I would think if you just really are upset with Bryan Harsin, you would want him to wear the record. Like, if you just can't stand the guy and you think he's just torn down your program, your favorite football team, you would want him to wear a 4-8 record leaving the program. Don't make some interim. If the interim is Zach Gethridge, don't make him wear, a 1-5 record in the season. That's not fair to him.
I agree with that. I agree
with
that.
So make him wear it. And also, you're going to pay him $15 million either way. Let him wear it. Let him carry that on his resume.
Well, there's an idea circulating on social media, and some of the national pundits have started to pick it up, that Auburn is not a good job, Zach.
It's so stupid.
It's a dumb narrative.
Stupidest thing.
Yeah. And so I did want to talk, while we're on this subject, I did want to talk about that.
Sure.
The idea that, coaches weren't given a chance here. Now, I will acknowledge that there were some things that happened that maybe made the job more difficult for Bryan Harsin and his staff. They didn't know how to handle any of that, right? They came in and they didn't have the experience of the big time program to understand booster culture and recruiting and some of the things that they would have needed to get ahead of the curve, and they were reactive instead of proactive, I guess.
But doesn't, and I'm not saying what happened to him in the offseason is right. Please do not misunderstand me here. But doesn't what you just said kind of play to the fact, or play to the folks that were like, he's coming from Boise, he doesn't know what the SEC is like? Doesn't that kind of play into that a little bit?
It does, but as long as you are being fair to say there's culpability on both sides, like you hired a guy from Boise.
Sure.
Hired a guy from Boise.
You hired him. That's right.
So you maybe had to say, okay, you know what? Let's get in here and make sure that he understands these certain things about Southern recruiting culture and, managing a big time program. Like, you hired him. So instead of throwing him to the wolves, maybe we could have been a little bit more invested in his success instead of just waiting on him to fail. But ultimately, like, beyond that, though, like, the idea that Auburn is not a good job, like, coaches don't get a chance here, it's just not accurate. Like, again, if you let Bryan Harsin finish out the season and he finishes with 2 straight losing seasons, you can't really say he didn't get a chance here. because whether you like it or not, the line got worse year over year, right? And certain aspects of the team got worse year over year, as did the record.
Yeah, I mean, I think your quarterback play has gotten worse. I think your running game has gotten worse. The offensive line has a big part of both of those. I'm willing to accept that. The defensive line is better. I think that's just personnel, though. I don't know how much of that is coaching. Mm-hmm. We'll see. The defensive linemen love Jimmy Brumbaugh, though. So, I'll give him credit. That's cool. Linebacker play is not even on the same planet.
It is.
It's awful.
Awful.
It's awful. And I refuse to believe that they're bad players. They're not. Owen Papo's good.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I think Cam Riley has all the traits you want. Wesley Steiner's athletic as heck, and he's out of position. That is coaching. And so I have a hard time buying it. I have a hard time buying that it's it's fully on all these kids.
Well, Pap is one of the highest rated recruits in Auburn history. As a matter of fact, in his class, the only person that was rated as high as him, not quite, was Bo Nix. I mean, those were two of the highest rated guys that we had come through. And to see him consistently take the wrong gap and take bad angles on tackles and do things, I'm with you. I believe that's more coaching than it is talent. He has not played well, but ultimately this, we need to be talking about what they do on the field. And, before, the last guy got 8 years. He got 8 years, right? The guy before him won a natty, right? But he didn't lose his job because of one season. There were other things going on that team that led to the decision but it was 3-9.
How about the guy before that? The guy before that got 8-9 years?
Yeah,
almost a decade. Right.
You're right. Yeah. Let's stop acting like you're not going to be given a chance to do the job at Auburn. There are expectations. There's a fan narrative that, their expectations are just too high, and that's why they can't give anybody a chance. And I'm just like, Auburn has had fewer coaches over the last 20 years than Bama has.
Yeah, and it's not just all on Auburn. Look at what happened in Mississippi State.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had their guy for 2 years, and he was gone because he wasn't getting it done. When Bryan Harsin was hired, we all said one thing. It was going to be a build. Everybody said that. And everybody's like, okay, cool. This is a guy that can build a program. That's kind of what we were banking everything on. And he hasn't done that. When you're a program builder, like we all thought he was going to be, you're out there recruiting. You're out there getting the guys that you want in the transfer portal. You're supporting NIL. And none of those things happen.
Right. Yeah. I think that, what puts him in the danger zone this year, like you said, and a lot of fans have said, I've seen this narrative. A lot of fans have said this publicly, is that if at least they could point back to a high level of recruiting to say, at least they're bringing in high level recruits. So there is something to build on.
Mike, I'm going to stop you there. I think if you could point back to anything that you've done well.
Yeah. I mean, listen, the results on the field make it hard, I think, to say that anything is really headed the right direction. I mean, you've got a rash of injuries all over the place. And this is tough. I want to stress, Zach, I've been pretty supportive of this staff. This is I've just been willing to wait to see what happens before we start going down this narrative. Now we're halfway through the season, and I think it's fair to start talking about it now, right? There are going to be people was like, oh, Mike G, I told you, in the offseason this would happen. And I just don't, projecting the negativity is something I'll just never get into. Wait to see what happens. And then, because he was going to be our coach this year no matter what. He's going to be Auburn's coach this year no matter what. And then,
and you guys had 2 players on every week. You guys got to know these kids, and you realize how hard they're working. And it's like, yeah, cool. These kids are giving us no reason to not believe in them.
Correct.
And so, they deserve that. And so we gave them that. And I think they're doing what they're told. And I know to some extent, Bryan Harsin loves to talk about execution, and they're not perfect. I'm not saying that they're not. I mean, so many offside penalties, and that's an issue, and it's coming from the older guys, which is just baffling. But it's tough. It's tough. But Mike G, there is a game this Saturday that Auburn, I think, is actually winnable just because of the history of this series. I don't think it's likely. I think what BetOnline has them at, 14.5-point dogs, and I think that's probably fair. But let's talk about what they can do, Mike G, in just a second, right here on Locked On Auburn. I want to give a shout out to our friends at Built bar. Have you tried the Built Bar Puffs yet? If you haven't, you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? Their newest flavor is delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. That's right. Built has done it again. Your new favorite treat, cookie dough chunk puffs. That's what Mike G calls me before we record. They have it's a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks. And of course, they're covered 100% in real chocolate. And you read the nutrition label on these things. They're very high in protein, very low in calories, delicious yumminess. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. That's at built.com. Mike G, Auburn has historically done extremely well against Ole Miss. Extremely well. What are your expectations going into this game? Because I guess my biggest fear in all of this is this team doesn't respond well to that big loss against Georgia. But 35-10 all time is the series. That's pretty lopsided.
Yeah. I'm not gonna boog on this one. And I'm gonna explain why I may be a little bit down. This is a down year for the SEC West, I believe. Ole Miss, they found a way to win games, but outside of Alabama, nobody has looked particularly impressive to me or dominant in the SEC West, which makes Auburn's struggles even harder to accept this year, because this would have been a year where you could have taken advantage of some things. So going into Ole Miss, I'm not super positive for one reason, and one reason primarily, and that's play calling. Eric Kiesau has not been good. I'll say it again for the people in back. Eric Kiesau has not been good. The amount of time it took them to pivot from the early offensive game plan that they had, that was quite clearly a failure. Everybody on offense suffered from a bad game plan that actually exposed our weaknesses on offense rather than covering them.
What does that mean?
It means that, again, handing the ball to Tank 20 times up the middle with a line that clearly was never going to be good in run blocking. And then after you get blown out at Penn State, taking that same game plan into Missouri is awful, right? They had to fumble the game back to you before you would take a look, pull all the stops. And then what we saw against LSU is how I thought that this offense would run. But
with Robby at quarterback.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, because I don't think there's a version of this offense with this line that TJ Finley could be successful behind, personally. And especially not the way they were calling plays. Definitely not the way they were calling plays. Yeah, these slow developing things, I think like a quick strike offense where you get the ball out of the quarterback's hands fast to help cover him, receivers run.
I think TJ would be okay in like a spread them out type offense. But
they weren't doing that.
Yeah, Auburn's not going to run that.
They were running 12 personnel for 3 games, primarily. With tight ends and I didn't understand what we were doing. And then versus LSU, I had a little bit of hope, even though they lost that game. It was like, all right, but this was the pivot that I was expecting after Penn State.
Yeah, first half offense, it's like, okay, all right, there's a blueprint here.
Yeah. Now here's where we're at. You got your ass whooped versus Georgia because again. LSU, I think they caught LSU a little bit by surprise because the offense they had run, it would have been hard for them to prepare for because that wasn't on tape, right? You put it on tape for Georgia, and they have superior game planners on their side, so it was going to be harder. But now you put it on tape twice for Ole Miss, and I just don't like football is a game of punches and counter punches, and planning for the counter punch is something that you have to do, and they have not shown that they have an ability to be able to do that to date. And I think now, mid-season, expecting them to be able to do that is going to be, to me, it's a hard sell. So, and this is coming from somebody, again, who has booged on this staff for the most part. But, I'm pretty close to, how can we expect something different at this stage?
Right. I I mean, I'm concerned with the offense. I actually think the defense will be okay for the first half. I think it's going to look very similar to Georgia. I think it's going to be close in the first half, and then Auburn's not going to be able to score late. I mean, it almost doesn't matter kind of what you do, because that, like you said, I like how you said that, the counter punch, there's no reason to have faith that it's going to be there. Right. And that's on coaching. So
right. Well, because here's the thing. You're good. What's the script been so far this year, Zach? Auburn comes out, looks hot for 2 drives, and then the other team starts to adjust. Yeah. And when people say, where are the adjustments? They're talking about the adjustments to other people's adjustments to them, right? Once they adjust, it's like they're trying to do a lot of the same stuff, and there's just not an acceptance. If the great coaches anticipate the counter punch and say, hey, they're going to adjust to what we're doing here at some point. Once we do, they do the next drive. Here's what we're going to hit them with. And I just haven't seen that. So I will go back and I'll say this, because I've been told this by at least 4 different offensive players. The unluckiest part of this whole thing for Bryan Harsin was Austin Davis not working out.
Okay.
Yeah. I had some players, I'm going to leave their names out of it.
Sure.
Tell me directly, if he had come on board, they were excited about the version of this offense that he sold, the vision of this offense that he sold. After it didn't work out, the pivot, some of the offseason stuff made it harder to go out and get somebody reputable to come in with the idea that you have a lame duck head coach. But someone on staff told me Eric Kiesau was about 25th on the list for OC, and it was the pivot that they had to make because they could not get anybody else under the circumstances of this entire offseason. And so this is why I don't have the faith, right? You haven't shown any ability to be able to counterpunch effectively, and the guy that you have at the helm, publicly they're expressing support for him, but ultimately we all know he was not first on anybody's list, including Bryan Harsin. So your 5th string OC, if you will, is running the show. And, Bryan Harsin seems willing to die on this hill, man. I don't know why. I think when he looks back on it, he'll say, damn, man, we should have probably gone a different direction, or I should have been more involved, or,
I'm all for loyalty to your people, but it's, sounds like he's been loyal, stubbornly loyal. If all that's true. So, Mike G, how can people find you, hear you, support you, all that stuff, bud?
Yeah, we're over on YouTube. So just go check us out. We're going to be covering the rest of the season. It's going to be a very interesting ride the rest of the season to see how things go. But we've got Watch the Film. We've got a lot of different things going. Go check us out on YouTube. Lots of good stuff over there.
Mike G of the War Report. You can read all my written work at auburndaily.com. And we'll see you tomorrow right here on Locked On Auburn.